Yep.
Yep, perfect. So William Bridges has, so this is not specifically a concept that is applied for cultural adaptation. However, we use it quite a bit because it works pretty well with what goes on when we're going through cultural change. William Bridges' idea is that there's change and there is transition. So he distinguishes change from being a reflection of a concrete and objective reality, where we go from one state to another state. We move from A to B, and that's what changes. So it can be like if you're moving house or moving country, you're moving from one country to another country. So we go from an initial or old state to move to then, in time, to a new transformed state. He then talks about transition. He says that transition is not the same process. It's a more of an internal process that goes on and is the more subjective aspect of change, which we will all deal with in a very different way and go through very different emotions, stages to deal with this. So it's a bit more like that in terms of the internal process that we could experience. He goes on to say that this adaptation process or transition is made up of 3 phases, which we're going to go into and which will be sort of the basis of our reflection today. The first phase is the separation phase, so it's the ending. So the beginning starts with an ending, and which then moves on to what he calls the neutral zone, which is not really that neutral. It's more of a crisis phase in the sense that there's a lot going on in this time. It's a zone where it's no longer what it was like before, but it's not yet what it's going to be like. So there's a lot going on in this phase to then move on to the renewal phase, the new beginning. So if we move from, I'm going to go into each stage a little bit more, and Luca will illustrate with some cultural adaptation examples from his experience or from sort of general experiences to illustrate. So in the initial old state, there's a lot of stability, there's a lot of routines in place, we know how to do things, and we're often rewarded for this as well in our society on many levels, and we do more of. So we just reproduce and it just happens naturally. We know we're comfortable. When change happens, so we go through the ending, the letting go of. So in the beginning there is an end, and William Bridges mentions 5 different elements to this. The first one is dismantling, disengagement, sorry. This is where we have to separate from the familiar. The second is dismantling, which is where we need to let go of what is no longer needed. Disidentification, where we need to reevaluate our identity. So often when we are in a situation of change, our identity changes as well to a certain extent. Disenchantment, so discovering that certain things just no longer make sense anymore. And disorientation, and where we have a sense of losing reality or losing touch with our own reality. Luca, you're muted.
Sorry. I think can all connect now with this phase right now. Separation. Many things ended for us now, or ending right now. In a cultural context, when in my work I can see what happens with a spouse or a partner of an expat that is traveling with him, and there is a loss of role. The role is changing completely. Maybe he or she had a previous job, and when he is leaving that job, to go with a partner in a different culture. So that is really something that touches an identity issue. But as well, there is a pattern of stimuli, we call it in transaction analysis, that changes completely. When I wake up, the smell of the coffee, the sound, the sound of the surrounding, the external stimuli changes, and I have to I have to let go. So it's not just a physical letting go, it's not just a physical stimuli that I'm letting go, but as well, psychologically, it's a really different pattern I'm leaving, and I'm leaving relationships might be, it's that is what was there before is getting to an ending. So I think we can think of different examples in a cultural adaptation process. What are people experiencing? What are they letting go or struggling in letting go?
And so once this phase of ending is ending in itself, we move into a more uncomfortable zone, which is this neutral zone, or crisis phase. And William Bridges describes this as an empty in-between time, when everything feels as though it's up for grabs and you don't quite know who you are and how you're supposed to behave. So this is really where we feel confused and lost, and we don't really know what's going on. So we've probably started disengaging, dismantling, and we're in that state of confusion where we don't quite know where we're going yet or what it's going to be like. And this can be, this is illustrated often or comes up through uncertainty, which is definitely what we're going through right now. We have to deal with a lot of uncertainty, ambiguity as well, impatience, because we want it to go faster. And actually some people will want to skip this phase. However, it's an essential phase to really build the foundations for the new beginning afterwards. We are often faced with paradox, anxiety, and a new conscience of what's going on can emerge from this moment, because often when we're in this neutral zone, we might want to isolate. Well, we're in isolation in effect due to the coronavirus, but have a sense of wanting to also have time and space for ourselves. I think I can just speak for that. I have moments where I really actually feel too overwhelmed and I need to disconnect literally from all our screens, because it's all coming in that way. And that's when a new conscience can around what's going on can emerge. So I said this is an uncomfortable zone or moment, but it's filled with opportunities for growth and insights, which will enable us to make the right decisions for afterwards.
So this is the phase talking about another need we have, the need of contact, recognition. This is a place where we might know when we're in this phase, we're sort of struggling, trying to understand how is it that we make contact with people? How is it that we create relationships? How do we build relationship in this new context in a different way? So it's sort of being aware that there is a different pattern and you're quite confused by that. And you're trying to figure out what is it? How does it work out here? Some of the examples I think I can think about is when you work in a different context where there is a different communication style. So if I'm open, I prefer an open, direct communication, and I'm in a context where there is a more indirect communication. How does that land? How does that land in my reality? If someone is being very indirect, it might be that I perceive this as a discount or not recognizing me, not recognizing the other as being able to build a relationship, a proper relationship. So this brings some confusion as well. So it's sort of not a very pleasant place, but you're sort of, the energy is moving in that place.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely not a pleasant place, however, a necessary place to go through. Which then brings us into the new beginning, which is the start of, well, the start of something new. And sometimes we don't even realize we're going into the new beginning because it really merges in with that neutral zone. And as slowly we start finding new ways of doing things and exploring and embedding them slowly. But some people will feel really invigorated by these new beginnings, and because it's quite exciting, and others might find it challenging still. Even though it's more defined, there's still adjustments that needs to happen. And we could even think about, well, this is a sort of a more of a societal standard, but some events that can happen in our lives, like having a baby or getting married, which is supposed to be big, huge, happy events, and yet that transition process into that new lifestyle is not always easy. So it can be stressful still to be in that new beginning. However, we go through, this is a phase where we are integrating. So there's integration of a new story, of something new that's about to start. And we go into a different mood, and we're more into trial and error. So we're accepting to do things in a different way, and probably trying and making mistakes and learning from that and growing from it. It's a slightly different mindset to the neutral zone. There's a lot more energy and positive energy when we're here, openness as well, engagement, and learning, of course. We start learning new things, and we're open to that learning and to new explorations. So in this, once we've come to this new transformed state and it's getting defined and we're getting comfortable, well, then we begin to optimize a lot more our everyday lives. We're embedding new ways, and there's a new stability that is coming out of this.
Well, an example could be taking another need, the need to structure our time. In this phase, you start structuring your time in a way which is more adaptable, and it's more it's adapted for the new context somehow. So sort of if you are in Italy, for an example, you start and you come from a different place where lunches with colleagues are not a pattern, a usual pattern, while here it is something that might be important in the context where you are. You start using your time differently. So you have more time for social gathering, for example. Not now, it's difficult to talk about social gathering now. But sort of you start adapting to a new structure. And for example, talking about adapting to a new structure, both Karolina and I are trying to figure out how to adapt what are our training skills in a completely different setting. And I think we're sort of trying to figure out how to provide training in a completely different context. This is a clear example on how difficult it is to get into a new pattern here. So, yep. You want to add?
I was just thinking also from a culture in coaching cultures. So I know coaching cultures differ also around the world, but I can speak for France, where in France the coaching culture is very much face to face. Now a lot of coaches are having to think of, oh, now we need to go virtual. This is the only way we can actually stay in contact and keep up. So that's a cultural shift in a certain profession that's going on. A lot easier in other parts of the world where it's already a lot more accepted to do it by the phone or virtually, or so. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think people in this room have experiences this. I can see people that I know that have strong experience in virtual coaching. So we will invite you in very small groups, I think groups of 3, and we're asking you to answer to these questions, to explore these questions together. Reconnecting to a past cultural adaptation experience, whatever that cultural adaptation might be, The first question is, what might be similar and different to what you're experiencing today? And I presume there are many things that are different, maybe easy to find different things. I invite you to explore as well, what is it in your experience that is similar? Is there something similar there? Second question, what resources can you use today based on that past experience? And by resources, we mean external resources or internal resources. What is your strategy? How is it that you cope when you are in transition? What helps you to go forward in that model Karolina described? And last question, yep. What other resources, strategies might be needed to adapt to today's situation? So not only explore what worked in a different context that you can use here, but as well, what other resources do you think you can bring in this to face this present situation? You're going to have 20 minutes in subgroups. And Karolina, do you want to add more regarding?
Yes, so the subgroups will be done automatically. So you're going to have in a short moment an invitation to join a breakout group, we hope. And Gradiola might want to say a little bit more about that. We'll give you, I'm just wondering on timing, 20 minutes, maybe we might have to shorten that a little bit because we've run a little bit overboard. So you will automatically be sent into a breakout group. We will put these questions in the chat bar so that you can see those questions whilst you're working. And then when we'll invite you to come back into the big group again, our invitation is to have maybe, if you can define one person in each group who can share some learning of what has come out of this discussion, these questions, the main learning. So welcome back, everyone. We've had very fruitful and rich discussions in the breakout rooms, and we would like to share with you what has come out of these discussions about the adaptation process during this pandemic period.
So the first question was about what are the similarities and differences in this adaptation processes. And regarding similarities, one of the first points that were raised was around proxemics, the use of space, and how in this circumstances we are adapting to a new social distance, a new bubble. So this was one of the points that was raised. A second point regarded the resilience, that we are experiencing ourselves in a different way and able to review our standards and learn new skills. The fourth one is the dealing with the uncertainty. And here someone was talking about being able to do baby steps. So staying in the process of doing one step at a time, one small step at a time, without without planning too much in the future. Fourth part is the experiencing a loss, and this is somehow connected to the model that Karolina presented earlier, that somehow we are experiencing a loss, and it can be a loss of our standards, what we were doing, but as well a loss of certainty as well. And of course, there are major differences, big differences between the adaptation process in a cultural adaptation process and the adaptation process in these circumstances. I would like just to mention two, and I know there are many, many more. The first one is that there is the sensation that we have to be careful when we move around, especially because it's a potentially life-threatening situation. So regarding when someone talked about this social distance, the babble, there is another level of concern, which is it's not just about not feeling comfortable, but it's actually feeling a threat. Second point is that, and this is an interesting difference, is that while having let's say, a cultural transition, it is difficult to connect with others that are not going through your same experience. In this situation, because it is a pandemic worldwide situation, you can really connect with people that are across borders, because you have the feeling that we are going through a similar experience. So it's really an experience where we feel connected as human beings through this experience. So, and resources.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Luca. Another question that we asked the groups was to reflect on the resources that they could draw on, looking back at experiences of cultural adaptation and how these different experiences and strategies that were put into place to deal with cultural adaptation could feed and bring about resources for this specific situation we are encountering today. So one of the resources that came up was resilience. So we know from our previous experiences that we are able to adapt to an unknown context. So this was in somewhat reassuring to know that we've been, those who have experienced cultural adaptation have been through that process before, and this is again a new way of adapting. Another resource was mindfulness about emotions and feelings. So being attuned to what we are experiencing, what we are feeling, what's going on, identifying the physical and the emotional responses that we are having. And linked to that was that capacity to control the amplification in our mind. So there's something also about filtering out unnecessary pressures. I'm thinking about media, for instance, that can come and amplify maybe some feelings and emotions, and welcoming these emotions. Another aspect is creativity, is that we are able to draw on a number of creative solutions with fewer resources. So becoming creative in how to resolve certain problems, how to deal with certain things, knowing that we're locked in, is a little bit like having less resources when we're moving abroad to a new culture. We don't have everything at hand that we're used to having. Another resource is to focus on what we can control. So again, this is about being able to really take into account and filter out the things where we just don't have an impact on, we can't do anything about, and being able to focus on what we can deal with. Another resource, which I think is something that is emerging a lot during these times, is meditation. This links in as well on the mindfulness of feelings and emotions, and creating that inner space for ourselves. So finding those moments that we can have for ourselves, whether it's moments or a place or somewhere, and being able to meditate for those who can, or at least just being with oneself and resourcing ourselves through that. And finally, what came up as a resource was to acknowledge our needs. So to be in contact with what our needs are. Contact with nature, for instance, came up. So how can we maybe compensate our needs of walks or going out for those who can no longer do that, but maybe be more in contact with the sounds that we can hear through our windows, the birds, replacing that, but also just acknowledging what we need and what we're missing, as well as the significant relationships we have, and that missing the physical contact, which is so true as well when we're adapting to a new culture and moving abroad. We don't have that physical contact anymore. We need to find new ways of doing so. So these were all the rich elements that came out of this workshop. And I'd like to thank everyone for bringing in their energy, their thoughts, their experiences to make this a very, yes, exploratory and rich workshop.
I'd like to also thank Karolina Ehretsmann for hosting us and the participants. And I presume that whoever, if you're listening to this, whoever's listening can think about what your resources might be and what would you add to this list, which is, of course, a first list. And I'm sure there's many, many other resources you're putting in place. Thank you very much and take care.
Thank you.